Hey, welcome in. I'm Rita, and this is The Story I'm Telling Myself, a podcast about uncovering the beliefs that hold us back and rewriting them with truth, courage, and clarity. If you've ever felt like you're standing in your own way, you are not alone. Let's get into it. Woohoo! It is Friday. I don't know very many people that don't love a Friday. Maybe if you have to work on Saturday, sorry. But for most of us, this is the end of the work week. It's so wonderful to have you with us. If you are joining us live, first of all, thank you. We're so glad that you're here. And this show is all about participation. So please come jump in the comments, say hello, let us know that you're here, add your questions and comments throughout the episode. We love talking with you, and you're going to love talking with our guest today, Karen Taylor. Karen, tell everybody who you are.
So Karen Taylor, and just so happy to be here. I'm, thrilled that Rita wanted to talk about a topic that sometimes is a little heavy, but I'm a grief transformation coach. I actually just am renaming myself to grief integration coach because I think it fits a little bit more with what I'm helping people with. I did not ever think that this is what I was going to be doing for a living. I didn't have dreams of being a grief coach when I was 5, but it found me. This is absolutely a calling that found me. And it was really after a very significant tragic event happened in my life. In 2019, my sister passed away in a fire at her home. And it really flipped my life upside down. When they say that life can change in an instant, I absolutely understand what that means. And that was my experience. And I remember thinking, life doesn't make sense, and I need it to. And I had a lot of questions, no answers. And so I remember saying to, a higher power than me, if you help me understand what I'm supposed to be doing with this and help me understand how I'm supposed to help people, I will go do that. Universe kept its end of the deal, and it took me on a very long journey where I not only learned about grief and loss, but I learned about myself. I rediscovered who I am really for the first time in my life. And so I realized that this is what I'm meant to do in this world. It was through the death of my sister that I found myself and my purpose.
And that's why you're here today, because grief is something that comes for all of us, right? None of us get to escape that. Leslie, thanks for joining us. Glad that you are here with us today. I had Karen's LinkedIn profile up. I'm going to give you her website now. Karen is really starting to build out her following for her business on LinkedIn. So we would love for you, if you're a LinkedIn user, make sure that you connect with Karen on LinkedIn, ring that bell, follow her content. So we're going to, I believe that the name of the episode is Am I to Blame? And that was sort of one of the stories of many, I am certain, that was in your head, but you're going to take us into that story, Karen. Give us a little setup and tell us about why you found yourself ruminating on this question, am I to blame?
Absolutely. So what I learned was it's a very natural part of the grief process. And I call the time right after the loss, the free fall. That's what it feels like. And I think it's a very accurate description of what we're going through. And the free fall is kind of before you get to, the early grief, and then there's mature grief. So there are some markers that we use to kind of indicate where we're at in this process. And so the first exposure I had was so many nights. Just as soon as I laid my head down on the pillow, the thoughts came, and they were relentless, and they would not stop. And it was all the would have, should have, could have. I mean, you go through every different scenario that you can think of. And at the end of that thought is always, and then they would still be here. Right. And so for my sister, I had a lot of those thoughts. My sister had a lot of different issues throughout her life that sometimes made it hard for us to have a healthy relationship. And so I had a lot of thoughts of regret and guilt, and if I only did this, but what I learned was grief is very adaptive, and the
Mm.
rumination it's a stress response. It is an avoidant response where we're trying to avoid kind of, sitting in the grief. And that's part of the process. And I think it's a healthy part of the process if we don't allow ourselves to get stuck in that rumination piece.
Well, let's just can we pause there and
Yeah.
talk about this because I think you just touched on probably sort of the first road hazard of grief that many people fall victim to, which is this rumination and thinking that that is the grieving process. And you're saying it's not the grieving process. So can you break that apart for us a little bit?
Yeah, I think it might help. And I've learned so much about grief, and that's one of the things I'm doing is really part educator, part activist, because there's just so much that we really haven't allowed ourselves to really look at for grief. So I think maybe level setting with a couple definitions might be helpful. It was very helpful for me. So grief is the response to the loss. So if you have loved somebody, if you are attached to somebody, and if you lose that person, that pet, that thing, you're going to experience grief. That's why we say grief doesn't end, because if you've lost somebody, you're still holding the attachment to that person, even though they're no longer here. So because you still hold that attachment in your heart, which is what we want, you're going to experience grief. And grief is the waves of emotion that come up. It's what hits you on a random Tuesday when you're going about your day, and then all of a sudden a smell comes up, or you hear a song on the radio, or you see a picture on your phone, and you're just taken over by the grief. The grief is the ebbs and flows. It's the pain that comes from remembering the love that you held, that you're still holding, but remembering that person being in your life physically. So that's grief, and grief doesn't end. As long as you hold the attachment, you're going to have the grief. Grieving is the longer term journey that we go on to learn to live in a world that we no longer have that person, that pet, or that thing. And so that's the adaptive process of rediscovering who you are. So you can't go back to who you were before the loss. That's just not how that works. Grief changes you, and it changes really so many aspects of our life. It changes our relationships with other people. It changes our relationship with ourselves. It changes family dynamics. It changes roles that you serve. So there's a lot of change that's happening after a loss, and grieving is that process to learn to live in a different world than you did. It's the adaptive process. So part of, following that loss is you have different stressors that are happening in your life. Lots of different stressors. And rumination is one of the ways that we give ourselves a break from being in the grief, right? Because you can't be in the grief, working the grief, processing the grief 24/7. You just can't. Like our body and our brains need a break from that. And so rumination is one of the ways that your body is giving you a break from really understanding and accepting what's happened. So it's a normal, healthy function. It's just it's not healthy if we stay in that space. So when I work with clients, I actually use the dual process, which is intentionally giving people time to be in the grief and to work the grief. And it gives people time out of the grief to start to engage in life. Does that make sense?
It does. It does make sense. Hi, Christy. Glad you're with us today. So, so it's normal. It's normal to sit and really reflect, to ruminate on the person who's gone, the times you had together with them. How do you determine when where that line is between healthy and unhealthy?
It's very difficult. And I mean, I think that's the one message that we're continuing to understand with grief. It's not the same for everybody. And so everybody's situation is going to be a little bit different. But there are different, what I say is right after the loss, there's nothing to be done. It's just the time to experience that in whatever way you need to. When my dad passed away in September, for me, that was waking up, taking my pillow, taking it downstairs to the couch, and laying on the couch every single day for 2 months. And that is exactly what I needed. and there was nothing wrong with me. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't avoiding anything. I was literally just sitting in the heaviness of this experience. And then eventually I started to feel that lift, right? You're like, "Oh, today I think I want to go for a walk." And then it was, "Today I think I'm ready to go out and actually, put some real clothes on and go out for lunch today." And that felt good. And so eventually, you feel it's a bit of a lifting is what you feel. Like you feel like maybe you can breathe a little bit easier. You just don't feel the heaviness of that. For me, that was 2 months. For some people, that could be 6 months. For some people, it could be a week. I mean, it really is that individualized because we're so unique and each relationship that we have is so unique. So it is hard, but to kind of put some real rigor around some of those time frames. But it's just, you have to know yourself, and you have to know, are you, rumination is normal in the beginning. There does come a time where you have to just ask yourself real questions. And that's kind of one of the mottos that I'm using with grief is, let's get real about it. Let's get real about it with each other. Let's get real about it with yourself. And you have to ask yourself some questions of, am I using this in a way that's still a healthy, normal response, or am I getting stuck in this?
Right. Yes. And you're right. I mean, that would be different for every person. I remember talking to a therapist friend of mine raising teenagers, and I was like, how do you know when they need counseling? Like, how do you know how to differentiate between just normal teenage angst, anxiety, a stress response, and when it's something that requires maybe the next level of help, of aid, of a professional? And her answer was, when it starts getting in the way of their ability to live life the way they want to. And
Mm-hmm.
I love that answer. And I think it's probably something very similar. Like you said, I mean, there's um, that idea of resilience through this, of of finding the new normal, instead of kind of letting go of that idea. So we have this story. I think oftentimes I lost my dad in September as well. If I move on, I leave them behind.
Absolutely. I hear that all the time. And that's a real, like, that's what we have to work through. I mean, first of all, there's a lot of societal myths that really have made it very difficult for us grieving, because we think there's all these expectations. And if we're not doing it this way, we're doing it wrong. There's no wrong way to do grief. Like that, if you take one message away today, please take away that there is no wrong way to do grief. There are ways that are going to make it maybe more difficult to move forward in a way that I think maybe our hearts really want to. And that's where you need to step in, and that's where you need to say, I just need some help, right? Like, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, this is such a difficult experience. If it's the first time you've experienced it or the eighth time you've experienced, it's going to be difficult. And having somebody to be your guide and to walk along that journey with you that's what I wish I had. I had to kind of figure it out for myself. And when I did, I'm like, this is what I want to do, is to not to come in and fix somebody's grief, not to come in and hand them just, here's the prescriptive way to go through it, and everybody's going to go through it in this way. It's, I get it. I see you. I understand you. I understand grief. I don't necessarily understand your exact experience, but I've educated myself in this. I have become, very knowledgeable in the topic of grief and loss. I have a lot of lived experience, and I can help walk you through a journey that's going to eventually get you to a place of grieving with more joy and love than pain. Because the pain from the grief, I can't take away. I mean, that's the love. And you don't want anybody to take that away, right? Carrying that with you is a remembrance of how deeply capable we are of loving others. And I think that's beautiful. I really do. But I can help you get to a point where you're experiencing more joy and love and fulfillment than suffering, because I do believe that suffering is optional.
Yes. And what about people who believe that suffering is part of the process. That I think there are certain faiths that even teach that, that suffering is part of the expression. So if that's a story that you hold, that that you have to sort of feel some pain is a way of honoring the love that was shown. Um, Again, you know how would you suggest somebody that is sitting with that story, that the pain is part of the honoring that they're doing, how they recognize when they are ready to shift and move beyond just that pain?
I would say, don't worry, the pain is going to always be there. Like there's no chance of the pain not coming. So you're good there because again, the grief is the pain that's going to keep coming because you're still holding the attachment. So as long as you still hold the attachment and the love, don't worry, you're going to get your fair share of the pain. It's going to just hit you. You know, a few days before the anniversary of my sister passing, my body knows it's coming
Mm.
every single year. And before I even look at the calendar, I'm like, what is going on with me? I'm so emotional and I'm just up and down. And then inevitably I'm like, oh, yep, it's here. And I know I've talked to so many other people who feel that same way, on the anniversaries or birthdays or some of those, more special days. But so the pain is going to come. I think it's just a matter of then saying you can either hold the pain and the love and still have a life where you get to experience joy and fulfillment, or you get to have the pain from the grief and you have a life that's just going to include more suffering than those other things. And that's the choice that everybody has to make. I can't make that choice for anybody. My hope is that, we all get to a point where we're just normalizing grief and we're understanding that this is going to be a continued part of our lives. And so, for me, if I could have my sister back in a minute, I would give back all the growth that I've had, but I can't. And so because I can't, and because I know I'm going to experience a lot more losses in my life, I just had both of my parents pass away last year. My fiance's parents are going to pass away eventually. We're going to have friends. I mean, this is going to continue. So knowing that this is a known part of life, I would say, why wouldn't we want to get as good at this as we can so that we can balance and we can integrate the grief and carry it forward with us and still live a life that is fulfilling?
I think one of the things that we're trained as humans, especially when we're young, when we're children, we are trained to eradicate sadness from ourselves, right?
Mhm.
To to distract ourselves, to find something more joyful, etc. What I'm hearing and what you're saying is that we almost have to rewrite um, that tenant inside of our bodies that says push away the sadness. Am I hearing that correctly?
Absolutely right. I mean, most of us, people that I've talked to, no one really provided us a framework of how to deal with big emotions, right? In my family, it was, you're fine, you know, let's not get upset about that. Let's kind of sweep it under the rug and let's just keep on going. That's how I grew up. And so I got that message loud and clear. And definitely with grief, there is this societal expectation. I say we live in a microwave society where everything is just quick, quick, quick. And grief does not play by those rules. It just absolutely doesn't. And so when we have a society that is, like you said, Rita, not used to even really expressing sadness and allowing it, we also have a society that has very difficult time witnessing other people is experiencing that. So that's
Yes,
why
yes.
that's why so many people feel very isolated in their grief, because there's a lot of support initially. And then after the service, and I just wrote a grief guide called After the Service, that's when a lot of the support kind of dissipates and people go on with their lives as they do, right? I mean, that is life. But that's when things really start to get hard for the person going through the grief. And that's really when they need support the most. And a lot of people are just so hesitant to show up and do that because they don't want to make it worse. They're not sure what to say. And again, most of us have a hard time just sitting with somebody else in pain and not fixing it. Just being okay sitting with someone in pain and seeing them and saying it's okay just to do that, just to be exactly what you need it to be. And so people are often feeling like I don't have support. I don't have anybody to just kind of help me witness this grief and just tell me like what I'm experiencing is okay and I'm not broken and I don't need to be fixed. So there's so many dynamics that go on with this, but I think kind of overall it's we have to understand and know that this is a normal part of life. It is a normal part of life. And so the sadness is a part of grief. And also anger is a part of that. And guilt and happiness and joy. I mean, it's all the emotions come up with grief. It's not just sadness. But we also have to help everybody else understand that the person that is experiencing the grief, if they're experiencing it for a week or 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years, that's all normal for what they're going through. Like there is no rules to this and there's no time frame. So it's a whole lot of things I think that we have to understand and normalize.
Well, there's multiple people in this grief, right? And so we started out, we were talking about you specifically, but then there are the people that surround you. So when you were going through your journey of your sister's passing and you were asking yourself that question, what could I have done differently? What should I have done? The woulda, coulda, shoulda stories running through your head. And then she would still be there. What do you wish you had as show up for you? What would have been helpful to show up for you? Because I think all of us struggle. We love the people in our lives that are in their grieving process, but that the struggle is real. What do I say? How do I show up? How do I be helpful? What would have been most helpful to you?
Just to have people ask about her, just to have somebody stop by and say, I'm going to stop by today. We don't need to talk if you don't want to. I just want you to know that I'm here and I see you and I understand the pain you're going through. And I want to know about her. Like, tell me about her. Because that's one of the greatest fears that we have going through grief is people are going to forget about the people that meant so much to us. And, we don't hang on to the grief as like a way to get pity or like to get attention. That is absolutely not what's happening. The grief is always going to be there. We talk about them because that's a way that we can remember them. That's a way that we can keep them close to our hearts. And so I always tell people when you don't know what to say, showing up and being present is first and foremost one of the most important things for somebody going through grief, to see that they have that support that's just there, not trying to fix them, just showing up and being there, being present is such a gift. And then two, asking and talking about it. And if you knew the person that passed away, share stories and memories. I love hearing things about like my dad and my mom and what other people experience with them and how they perceive them. And funny stories. My dad was a golfer and he was just a big jokester. And I mean, I have so many of his golfing buddies that reach out to me and tell me funny stories, and it brings such a smile to your heart. And it is that uplifting part of grief. And we get the sadness, we get plenty of that. So all of those uplifting stories mean a lot to us.
I love that. I think this idea of one of the stories that we need to tell ourselves as the people surrounding those that have experienced the death of someone important in their lives is that we need to stop thinking it's our job to make them feel better. Stop that story and replace that story with, I need to sit with them in their sadness. I mean, that's really that's the whole point of Shiva, right? In the Jewish faith is you sit together, and it is not always sadness. I'm thinking about, I lost my dad in September as well, and we called in the family. We did have a very short period of time for people to come say their goodbyes. So everybody came from everywhere to do that. And so I said to my stepmother, we should schedule the funeral immediately after he passes so that we have everybody here, take away the need for people to travel twice because people had come many, many miles to be with him. And she said, I agree. And so I was literally, as he was actively going through his final biological process of dying, I was sitting writing the obituary so we would have it ready to go into the paper immediately. And all of those things were actually really good for me,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I had a task and I got to honor my dad. Like, it was perfect. But we were like, we just had so many tasks like that we had to do to make the funeral happen.
Mm-hmm.
And the family was all gathered at the house, and we were telling stories, and we were laughing, and we were joking. And there was more sadness after all of that was gone than
Mm-hmm.
there was in that moment of us being together to celebrate and honor his life. And it caught me by surprise, Karen, because I thought the rational side of my brain knew that letting him go was exactly what he wanted, what he needed, and he was a man of faith. So for him, he was stepping into his next life with his God. But the grief still, it comes.
So emotional hearing you say that. And I know, and this is grief. For this is grief, right? We have very similar stories, Rita, that our dads passed away in September, and my dad's was also we had a few days where everybody got to say goodbye. And he also was it was admirable to watch them go into that next stage confident. My dad said, I lived a good life. It was a good run. I got to see everybody and say goodbye to everybody. I'm going to be with your sister. And he was ready. We're not.
Right. Yeah.
We're not ready. And I think the other thing that we have to understand and know is that as much as we can see all that and be grateful for those experiences, our brain is imploding after somebody that passes away that we had an attachment to is no longer physically here because it doesn't make sense to our brain. Our brain is trying to understand how we can have this attachment and then they're not physically here. That's why we look for them to come through the door. We pick up our phone to text them, even though logically we know they're gone. It's because our brain is going through this whole process of trying to remap and rewire all the patterns that it's established with us and this person for years in our life. So that's why I say in the free fall, just give your body and your brain a break because it is doing so much behind the scenes that we don't even know about. But I think that's where
I think the story, so many people, like I have this conversation with my stepmother frequently. She's probably listening. Hi, Claire. And that is, the story is that I it's silly. I know he's gone. Like I like there's this almost a scolding of yourself for thinking, oh, she's that all the time. I think to myself all the time, oh, I got to get home and tell George about this. But and she
Mhm.
knows, she wakes up and she wonders where, is she going to wake him up if she gets up and out of the bed and then she realizes, oh, he's not in the bed anymore. We do. There's this our inner judge is just so hard on us sometimes, and the judge does not really understand the emotional. Our judges are not emotionally intelligent beings, so that's the least emotionally intelligent part of our brain is the part that is activated when our judge voice clicks on. And I just think it's important to really highlight that if the story that you're telling yourself is you shouldn't be doing that anymore, again, don't shoulda, coulda, woulda on yourself. Like it's not helpful because there is no right.
There's no right, no wrong way. And I think that's where when you think about kind of that rumination, again, it's a stress response. It's giving you some avoidance to accepting the fact that they're gone. when we work through that process, it's, we need to replace, we need to look at that eventually. And we need to replace the what ifs with the even ifs. Because even if I did this thing, even if I did that thing, that person was still going to pass away. Right. I had that with my mom with hospice. I had to make the decision to put her on hospice, and she passed away within like a week and a half after going on hospice. And so after she passed away, that was my rumination of, if I only would have tried this or had her go to the hospital
Yeah,
for this,
should I have fought harder? Should I have given
harder.
her a reason to fight harder? Yes. I hear this
And that's just your
conversation a
brain.
lot. Yes.
When it comes to, so that's rumination, but then there's the guilt that sets in too. And our brain hates uncertainty. I think it hates uncertainty more than anything. And so our brain would rather have us sit in a state of feeling guilty than being uncertain, because it gives the illusion of some kind of control.
Oh, wow. Whoa. Whoo, that explains a lot of things in life. But in this
Yeah,
particular situation, that makes so much sense.
it does.
So our brain would rather us be in this deep sadness because there's certainty there.
Mm-hmm. Like, if I'm to blame for it, then we know then that's what happened, because nothing is more uncertain than death, right? I mean, it's the most
Mm.
uncertain thing. And so that's where it puts us. And so I think when we really want to start to kind of come out of the guilt part of it, there's learning there, right? When I thought about the guilt with my sister, I couldn't prevent the death. So that was one learning that I had to really understand and go through. I couldn't have prevented the death. What I did take though away was, could I have been there more for my sister, not to fix her, but just to be with her? Yes, I could have. I can't change it because it is in the past, but going forward, when I'm in a situation where maybe I would have just not shown up for that person, I'm going to try to show up more and just be there. I'm going to just be more compassionate. So I do think there's learnings that we can
Mm.
take from it, but we do have to separate out the facts from the story, right? So the facts are, my sister passed away. Everything after that is the story.
Is the story. But you were reframing the story from this even if. So is this one of the techniques that you help people with? Can you explain that just a little bit more? I know we're about out of time, but I think it's, and by the way, Karen's got some resources. So while she's talking about the even if, I'm going to go ahead and drop the link here for people to go reach out and get a hold of those. Go ahead. Explain the even if.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like you said, it is a reframing, and it's just you know, what happened before the death shapes the death a lot of times, right? So as I talked about with my mom with hospice, like, my mom going on hospice was just part of the process of her dying. My mom was going to die either way. And so even if I didn't make the decision to put her on hospice, my mom was going to pass away. So it's really separating things out. And that's what we have to do. We just have to take, and we have to kind of pull, and I always do this. I'm like, we're pulling apart this thought because it all becomes one, right? We make it all one. So we're pulling it apart and we're saying, here's the facts and here's the story. And when you start to just dissect it and unpack it, then you can start to say, okay, that's an actual truth that feels better. And it actually feels more accurate than the story that I was telling myself. It's just a process that we have to go through.
I think that's a really strong way to end that. And again, skill that you can apply to so many areas
It's a
of
skill.
your life.
It is a
Karen
skill.
is Karen recently tagged me on a post, and we don't only grieve people and animals; we grieve circumstances in our lives as well. So please reach out and connect with Karen. She does have a TikTok account and all those things. She is actively growing her LinkedIn. So she'd love to see you there. And this stand.store / grief loss love is where you're going to find the resources that Karen has made available to people like us who are in the messy middle of finding our way through this journey. and she's going to keep adding to the store. So all of what she wants to share with us is not out there at this moment, but there's some good starter things that you will find there. Karen, thank you so much for being our guest. Any final words that you want to share with everyone before we close the episode?
I would just say, just thank you for the opportunity to talk about this topic, and let's all just open our mind and our hearts to grief and loss, and just really accept it as a friend, as something that wants to stay with us and go on the journey with us. But it is about continuing our journey, and we can do that in a way that we honor what we've lost and we celebrate what we're becoming.
And if you need help or you know someone who needs help, reach out to Karen. If she's not the right person, she can send you in the right direction. I'm so happy that we are in a place in society that I hope we're not going to retreat from, like we have in so many other spaces, where we recognize that mental health is part of whole health. And it's important, just as you would ask somebody for assistance if you had an ache in your leg that you had had for weeks that wasn't going away. It's the same thing. It's an ache in your heart wherever it is. You have access to resources. So make sure that you are thinking about your well-being holistically, and never hesitate to reach out for resources and help. Even though you might have the story that you're telling yourself that everybody does grief and they don't need anything extra, you don't know their story. I promise you don't know their story. So don't talk yourself out of it. Thank you, Karen, again for being with us. Happy Friday, everyone. The weekend is coming. I should promo, so let me just tell you, we've got 2 new episodes up next week, and I know this is a heavy topic today, but I've got 2 ladies that are really going to light us up next week. So I have Sabrina Victoria coming on Wednesday at 11 a.m. And Sabrina she's a community builder. She is a go-getter. She is going to fire you up. And then on Friday, I have Olivia Fitchett, who worked in Michelle Obama's office as an intern, and she's going to talk about a space for imposter syndrome. Imagine walking into the White House as a college graduate, your first opportunity, right? She's going to talk about that, and we're going to bust through a bunch of myths about imposter syndrome and how to navigate that. So make sure that you got it on your schedule. You're going to join us back next week. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Have a wonderful weekend. See you soon. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for joining us on The Story I'm Telling Myself. If you loved this episode, would you do us a big favor to help us reach a bigger audience? Simply subscribe to The Story I'm Telling Myself podcast and rate this episode and share it with a friend. Thank you for listening.